Merkel Media.
I'm exhausted, looking for everything in the shadows. Start looking at people like they don't matter. I'm waking up to the fact, more than a little bit shallow. I'm lost in this hole, but I don't wanna. I'm lost in this hole, 'cause I'm just trying to
What's good, guys? We are back with another episode of Free the Rabbits, and I've got Heidi Luv back, and she crushed it last time on the last episode we did about Joseph Smith and Aleister Crowley and their connection essentially together over this whole occult ideology that they both had, and really how Crowley was a big fanboy of Joseph Smith. And the fact that Heidi is also an ex-Mormon, so she was able to give a lot of her personal take on those particular ideologies. But today we're going to get into a very interesting topic, and it really spawned from an email that I got almost 6 months ago. One of the listeners reached out to me, and I had mentioned Rudolf Steiner as a part of an episode. And they said, I think that you're misinformed about Rudolf Steiner. He's not an occultist. He's not a Gnostic. He was a Christian. And I was a little thrown back from that because I've done quite a bit of research on Steiner. And I said, you know what? I'm going to pocket this for now. And when it makes sense, we'll really get into Rudolf Steiner. And I started looking into the Akashic Records because I had another person ask me, hey, when are you going to do an episode on the Akashic? And I was like, well, you know what? I probably should do an entire episode on the Akashic Records. And while I was doing research on the Akashic Records, I reached out to Heidi, and I don't even know if we were talking about doing an episode together per se, but it kind of spawned off because you were talking about Rudolf Steiner. And I said, hey, do you want to do an episode about the Akashic Records and Rudolf Steiner? And you said, yeah, I do. So I was pretty excited about that. And then all the research spawned out so much that we're going to turn this into a two-parter. So today we're going to talk specifically to the Akashic Records. We're going to talk about what they are, the characters involved when it was brought to fruition into all these different religious organizations. And then we're going to talk about Edgar Cayce and his idea of what the Akashic Records were, because his idea was a little different than some of the others. And in all honesty, they all had different ideas of what it exactly was. So we're definitely going to do that today. And I'm really excited to do this. And I'm done talking now. So how you doing, Heidi?
I'm good. How you doing, Joel? I'm glad to be here. This one is an interesting one. And I can see why people would say Steiner was a Christian. And just because somebody is a Christian doesn't mean they're not involved in the occult, right? Like we've learned this over and over, like Dr. John Dee is by far my favorite example. I hate to say that, you're not 100% wrong, but you're not 100% right either. This guy changed the Lord's Prayer, just FYI. He made it super dark. So we'll just go there for the beginnings, right? The preface of that is, and he had some good ideas too. He's probably my favorite occultist as far as like some of the good things, right? There's great things. It's so hard because you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But like, let's be honest, there's some really good things here, some really bad things here. So, it's hard.
Hey guys, thank you so much for being here on YouTube with myself and all the other free range rabbits. We have just recently started Free the Rabbits merchandise with our Touch Grass shirts, Rabbit logo tees and hats, Nephilim Portal Baby tees, and our brand new Puck Wudgie Tube shirts available in all sizes with several color options. Also, for the people who've been asking how they can donate to the show financially, we have several ways to do so. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/freetherabbits where we have monthly memberships, or you can give a one-time donation. If you are following on YouTube, we also have memberships there with different tiers, all of which have custom emojis you can use while on the channel. And if you can't donate financially, just you donating your time is the best gift possible to the show. And for that, thank you so much. Keep sharing the show, everyone. Now, let's get back into it. You're completely right, Heidi, on that aspect. And it's something I talk about on this show a lot, especially when it comes to Gnosticism. There's a lot of great things that come out of it that are very Christian. And that's the deceptive piece of it is you've got all of this good, but then you interlay it with all of this negative stuff. And then it becomes not biblical at that point. And then it becomes very self-serving. And I feel like that a lot of these occultists and Gnostics, as much as they proclaim that they're killing the ego, they're actually enhancing it because now they've created an atmosphere where they're a part of an elite system that only other people can get to if they come to them for the knowledge, right? You got to be an initiate. You actually have to, in Rudolf Steiner's words, which we'll talk about in part 2, you have to have the ability to be an initiate. So it's not like something that you just can just do. You need to be worthy of it. And that also ties into bloodlines and some of the racial things that we're going to get into tomorrow with eugenics and root races and all that, which will be fun. But we're going to get into the Akashic today. And why don't you break down what the Akashic Records are exactly, and then we'll talk about some of the characters involved with it too.
I'm going to say this in the funniest way possible because I heard this on somebody else's show and I thought it was the funniest thing ever. This is like a ghost library. I mean, I couldn't help it. Like we bring you serious things. Like me and Joel are very serious researchers, but this was a good one. I was like, I'm going to use the ghost library because that's a good one. And so basically, this is where they tap in, right? This is where you get the words downloads. And he called it the Akashic field when we're speaking specifically of Steiner. They all change it a little bit. Like you said, like some people are like, oh, it's this, it's that. And they tweak it because, they always do. But when you're talking about this, it's a literal, basically a crystal ball of library out in the ether, right? They're tapping into this whole situation. But I always wonder with this knowledge, I mean, it just sounds, so much like eating that apple and the tree, it's just a little like, there's a price to be paid for every single thing that we get that's forbidden knowledge. I'm sorry. Like, it's just, yeah. So the ghost library may very well be that. And I'm not saying Steiner didn't have some great predictions. You know what? He was right on about some things, also super wrong about a lot of things. So it's always two truths and a lie, right? So, yeah.
Right. Completely. And I agree with you on the idea that tapping into the so-called records, that you will get some right answers. And that's the deceptive part. And I did talk about this with Isaac Weishaupt on an episode called The Enochian Download, and we alluded to the Akashic. I think he even may have said the word Akashic Records at one point, but we alluded to the Akashic Records, and our idea that we were putting forward was that you're not actually tapping into a recorded system. And I'm not going to say that a recorded system doesn't exist either, but the idea that we can tap into it, to me, seems very unbiblical. And are you actually tapping into it? Or when you think you're tapping into this, are entities giving you information that could be very well right? That's part of the deception. They want to give you information that's right. So when they give you the information that's not, that you're going to take it also as truth. So if you're talking to an entity in the astral and they're giving you this information and you come back and say, this is what it is, and it is that, well, the next set of info that they give you will also be given to other people as truth, and people will start following it, not having any clue that it's actually fake.
Yes. And then you're sleeping with the other guy's wife. That's just at the end of it all. Like, we know these things require payment, blood sacrifice, different things like this. Like, it's never that simple. It's just never that simple. And I'm not saying, like you said, that it's true. Yeah. Okay, cool. Like, he may have known a lot of things. He probably is right about a few things, but I'm certain from what I've read, he's wrong about a lot of things too. And not just him, like Madame Blavatsky, all of them. Let's be real. Like, none of these people have all the answers. And anybody that does, you probably should be a little concerned. So, because me and you, we're researchers. Like, I've been wrong before. Like, people come at me, oh, she's a know-it-all. She knows it. I'm like, you know what? No, I'm learning. I'm trying to help people. And that's, so they don't go down this road, right?
Right. And to that point too, about being open and honest about your research and changing your mind with further research, I think that's the sign of a good researcher. I think that whenever we theorize about things, we need to go into it trying to debunk it first, and then coming in with, well, I don't have an answer for any of this, so here's what I'm theorizing about because of said other information that I've actually researched. Because if we go into things trying to prove them a lot of times, then we'll find a lot of confirmation bias that's involved with it. And we're going to find the answers to whatever we want because we can move the goalpost and all kinds of assumptions about said topics if we don't do that. And I think that even goes with these occultists. I think that with a lot of what they were studying, there was a lot of confirmation bias also, even with Rudolf Steiner, because what they were trying to do was prove their ideas. So they were willing to take whatever these entities told them to then say, well, this is definitely it because I met with this entity in the astral or in the aether, and it has to be real because this entity is way more powerful than me, not even thinking that, well, this could be a negative entity that's just tricking you.
Right, right. And even if we look at the system that they set up, let's play with their rules, right? If we are in the lowest part, period, right? We're in either the highest part of hell or the lowest part of heaven, one way or the other in their system. I'm not talking about in real life. I'm talking about in their system. And we look at all these other dynamics built on top of it. Why the heck would you think this entity would be something so high up that it would be benevolent? Let's be real. If we're piercing the ether with our silly things, and this is whatever you want it to be, you're probably not talking to something good. That's just my opinion. So
completely agree with that. And that's been a pretty point of contention on my show since I started it, was the connection to entities and what they give you. And you'll see throughout history, and you brought up John Dee, and Edgar Cayce was a part of that whole 30 aethers that they unlocked, that eventually Newberg and Crowley unlocked later. But they were connecting with angelic beings. And it's not to say that they weren't connecting with angelic beings. They just weren't the type of angelic beings that we would consider to be rolling with the good side of Yahweh, the good side of God, right? That's something that we have to always consider. I've met people that said they have talked to Jesus Christ himself. I'm like, okay, well, what did he tell you? Well, when they start talking about what supposedly Jesus told them, it always ends up being very New Age. It also ends up being very occult in nature, very Gnostic in nature, things that are not biblical at all. And to me, that's just an entity masquerading as Jesus. Mm-hmm. And we know that they masquerade as all kinds of different gods. And to that point, that is the essence of Gnosticism, that specifically Jesus was a great prophet. He was just an ascended master. He's something that we can all obtain. It's the Christ consciousness, right? And that's what these guys believed. And really Theosophy and the movement that came out of it, Anthroposophy, which was what Rudolf Steiner started when he left Theosophy because they had beef and he didn't like what they were trying to push. And we'll get into a little bit today probably about what that was. But they were very high on those New Age ideologies, in specific this Akashic Records, which is supposedly a compendium of all universal events, thoughts, words, emotions, and intent ever to have occurred in the past, present, and future. And it's not just with humans. It's all entities and all life forms. So that leads into that Great White Brotherhood, where now when people talk about the Great White Brotherhood, Heidi, they don't just talk about the entities that are part of it or the ascended masters, the people that ascended. They also talk about extraterrestrial from other planets that have also ascended. So it's become this literal space force that's in this astral realm that you can tap into, and you can tap into this information, which is this Akashic Records.
Well, and if we're already predetermined, right? Like if you're predetermined in your life, and actually we must have been super great in their whole system, because you're redheaded and really light, and I'm super white. So hey, I guess our next life is we're done, right? I'm hoping. Ha ha. And we'll get into that bigger, but I'm just saying.
I got Nephilim
right?
blood in me, man.
Well,
I'm all good.
And that is the one I'm going to tell you. That is the one thing my husband is like, don't come at me with this. And you know why? He's a redhead.
That's funny.
And he's like, please don't talk to me about the Nephilim. I'm like, calm down. I mean, I get it, but also it's pretty funny.
He needs to get over it because he is.
Yeah,
so.
I'm like, you're redheaded. You're a Viking. You're half a Viking. Like his DNA is like severely Viking. I'm like, well, and I mean, I get it. Like, I get it. I have green eyes and light hair and white skin. Like, anyways, I'm from a really weird family line. But regardless, when we look at these things, right, and even if they build Christ into them, because Carl Jung does this, all these people do this, right? And then what happens? They're always like, oh, and by the way, write a book. If you have ever had a line to an angel and God didn't send it, like you're channeling it, you're doing the things, you're manipulating ether, you're doing this stuff, not just praying. No. Rituals, right? Things that pierce the ether. If you're doing that and something answers, you're knocking on the door probably 3 times. No, I'm kidding. So if you do that, you are going to get what you get. And I'm sorry, like most of them get to a point where they're like, probably shouldn't have done that. It sucks. But every single time, even Plato talks about this. Like, this is so old. There is nothing new under the sun.
No, for sure. And to that point of how old it is. So Akasha is actually a Sanskrit word, and it means aether, sky, atmosphere, space. It means this astral realm. That's what it's meant since it was its inception. And what's interesting, the first person to really put it in the modern zeitgeist would be Helena Blavatsky. And she was one of the first founders of the Theosophical Society, and most people called her Madame Blavatsky, which you had referred to earlier. And she was a mystic and writer, and she immigrated to the United States in 1875, and she started this Theosophical Society. And as she's starting this Theosophical Society, she did it off of the backs of, in 1849, she was visiting Europe, the Americas, and she ends up in India. And part of when she went to India, she met these masters of the ancient wisdom, which we now know as the Ascended Masters, which the Golden Dawn coined the secret chiefs. We know of them as the Great White Brotherhood. And she learned from these Ascended Masters in Tibet. And it's been a point of contention of whether or not she did. I believe that she did. And also I found a very interesting thread in the fact that these Ascended Masters were also tied into governments. And Helena Blavatsky was actually doing work for the governments. Shocker, how these occultists are always doing some sort of quote unquote secret agent type work for these governments. And she was actually doing that. And one day I'm going to do an episode on that, which I think is fascinating. But she comes back and she starts talking about the Akasha, and she and Henry Steele Alcott really start pushing the idea of the Akasha. As a matter of fact, Henry Steele Alcott wrote this book called A Buddhist Catechism, which I'll talk about here in a minute. And he talks about the Akasha and Nirvana and what it actually means. And I thought this was interesting. And I actually went through the book. I can't help myself. I find that somebody's got a book and let me go through it. I'll just skim through it, right? And then before I know it, I'm 2 hours in. It's so interesting. So he did it because he was a big Buddhist, and he brought Buddhism really back to the forefront of the occult. He was one of the big catalysts for that. And yeah, Helena Blavatsky was also into Eastern mysticism as well, but she was more into the Hindu aspects of it, where he was more into the Buddhist aspects of it. And you'll find, so he writes this book and he does it in this series of questions and answers. The entire book is answers and questions. And I thought this was really fascinating that he did it this way, because he did it in a way that this is the questions people will ask to debunk this, and I'm going to give you the answer and how that this is right.
Mormons
it's
do
really
this.
fascinating.
Do you know that? They send.
I did not know this. Really?
My neighbor was he's like my other son, and he told me, shout out Louise if you watch this. He's out in the military right now. He's a Marine. So he told me when he came back from his mission, because we were talking about, getting out of Mormonism and all these things, and he said, oh, they give us, I was a leader, they give us a phone, and if they ask a question, you just type it in and it comes up with what you're supposed to tell them. I'm like,
wow.
Of course it
like
does.
a modern day scrying version of that is so fascinating.
Oh, so it's real.
And this is the old school version of that right here, writing a book and doing it in the form of questions and answers.
That's perfect. Wow.
It's really wild. So part 2, he talks about the Dharma or doctrine. And he says, question, can you give a better word for salvation? And I'm bringing up this part because I find this interesting, how he debunks Christianity using Buddhism and essentially the occult. And he says, answer, yes, emancipation. Question, emancipation then from what? Emancipation from the miseries of earthly existence of all rebirths, so reincarnation, all of which are due to ignorance and impure lusts and cravings. Question, and when this salvation or emancipation is attained, what do we reach? Nirvana. What is nirvana? A condition of slow cessation of changes, of perfect rest, of the absence of desire and illusion and sorrow, of the total obliteration of everything that goes to make up the physical man. Before reaching nirvana, man is constantly being reborn. When he reaches nirvana, he is born no more. So this is super Gnostic. This is the idea that you have to continually be reincarnated until you figure out the code, right? Until you can get past the demiurge to then move into the other layers of the astral. And this is what he's talking about. But this is what these guys believe, Heidi. They continually attack Christianity, but then they'll also mix in Jesus to make it like, oh, we love Christianity. We are Christians, but you're not, because you are essentially saying that you don't need salvation from anything. We can save ourselves.
Well, and they call him, they call Yeshua like basically a deranged, crazy person that's not even, sure, if you want to call him fitting it into the picture, great. I don't love the way it fit into the picture, but it always ends up like that, right? Yeah.
If you talk to Amon Hillman, he says he's a boy lover. So they go pretty crazy these days about what they say about Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's bad. Yeah. And it is what it is. But I don't think he's Yaldabaoth. I don't think he's the accidental ruler of this universe that's deranged and thinks he is, but he's not. And there's, all these other ones. That's just so much, right? Like, and also, what about our free will if all of this stuff is already written in the stars? What about, the whole reason why, in my opinion, what I thought from what I've read, we're supposed to be here and we can change things, right? You and I have both come from things that we changed our whole lives. Like, does that not matter? Like, I don't know. I just don't think that we chose to go through all these really hard things. And then, I don't think it's that. It wasn't pre-planned. I don't think so. But Mormons also believe in this. They believe you have a pre-existence and you've chosen everything, including all your trials, all your hardships, your parents, everything.
Right. And I think that goes into predestination. And I know that growing up, that predestination was talked about a lot. And I think there's a balance between God knowing how it's going to end, but also allowing you the ability to make your choice. So God's all knowing. So he does know the end of the story. It doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to change. You're part of the story. And he allows that, and it is your choice. It's just he's all knowing. He knows how it's going to play out. He knows what you're going to do before you do it. He just doesn't interfere in you making that choice to do it.
Right. And it's just, I just don't think that it's already like so predestined that it's written out. Cause
Right.
that's not really giving you free will. And that's obviously why they believe who is their God, because he doesn't give free will. Right. And that gets into
Correct.
that whole thing. And then they're like, but that's the light bringer. And that's, that's the good. And I'm like, well, maybe we have different opinions of that, but I can still respect it. I can respect that, Steiner said, if you want to ascend higher, go push a handicapped person on the beach. Yes, 100%. But you shouldn't do it for that reason to ascend, right? You should be a good person and learn like, this is a good thing to do because this is just a good thing to do and not expect a reward at the end.
And I think that's true Christianity in a nutshell, is doing things to be selfless, not being selfless to attain some sort of ascension or knowledge. And I think that's where that weird ideology comes into place with Gnostics and the occultists, because they have this idea that they're killing the ego. They all talk about it. And we'll talk about it a little bit today too. And we'll sure talk about in the next episode where we go strictly into Rudolf Steiner, because he consistently, repetitively,
Joel,
by the way, talks about getting rid of the ego.
I have a question for you. As your past history and as mine, were you more full of yourself then or now?
Way more than.
Right. Because you were what? Almost a god, right? Like me too. Samesies, right? We knew, we were all knowing. There was no one above like us. Like you had the answers. I had the answers. The church was the only true church. Yours was the only true way. Like you don't have any room for growth when you think you know everything. And I knew nothing.
Right. I know way more now,
yeah, exactly.
Which is even crazier. I know way more now about the stuff that I was involved in now than I did back then. And I understand the characters better. I understand where things come from. And I understand who started them, why they started them. And I think when you get into that part of it, it's very easy to understand the misconceptions that come along with following these left-hand paths. And I think that that's the tough thing for people, because they see what they're doing is good. Specifically Gnostics, and even occultists. I just had somebody recently tell me that I was very confused about Aleister Crowley, and he was a good person.
He's a great guy.
He was slandered, but yet he called himself the great B666. He signed every letter that way, but yet that was just a misconception. And you'll see that from people because they view what he did as anti-authority, that he was against the system, that he was against organized religion. But in reality, he was trying to invoke the Antichrist. In reality, he was involved with practices that were wholly against not just the Bible, but just morality in general. We're talking about, he said that
he didn't even understand what he was doing because he didn't understand alchemy. They didn't mean to do actual poo things, okay? That is like the substance of an alchemist where it turns dark, and that is called what? It's a swear word, so I'll just say poo. Anyway, that part, because it turned brown, it doesn't mean actual crap. Like he was kind of not very informed on his own stuff he was doing. So
he was an interesting guy. And one of the things that I've argued with, I agree with you there, definitely with some of the alchemical stuff, because he wasn't a great alchemist. He was a great spiritualist. And I think that he did get in contact with these entities. I don't necessarily if he knew sometimes what to do with these entities and the information they were giving him. But that also plays into the fact that he was also a charlatan and he was also a secret agent. So if he's working for the government and he's got other motivations that are involved with what he's doing, because my belief system is a lot of the occult practices that he was involved in were to bring back to the government, bring information back to the government for them to be able to use in a different format. So for me, he was all three. And I think when we understand Crowley better is when we understand that he was three different things and not just the one of the three. And most researchers will just focus on one thing that he was and not understand he was a super multi-layered person. And to that point, just like the rest of these occultists, they are super multi-layered. They didn't have their hands in just one thing. And we're just talking about Alcott here. And to get back to this book, the Buddhist Catechism, this gets us right into the Akasha again. So part 5, Buddhism and science, he goes back to asking the questions again. Question, do Buddhists accept the theory that everything has been formed out of nothing by a creator? Oh, this gets good. This is super anti-Christian and honestly super anti any sort of creator. Answer, the Buddha has taught that 2 things are causeless, Akasha and nirvana. Everything has come out of Akasha in obedience to the law of motion inherent in it. And after a certain existence passes away, nothing ever came out of nothing. We do not believe in miracles, hence we deny creation and cannot conceive of a creation of something out of nothing. Nothing organic is eternal. Everything is a constant state of flux and undergoing change and reformation, keeping up with the continuity according to the law of evolution. So they're big evolutionists too, by the way. They love Darwin, and which is, I think, a weird combination between the occultists and Gnostics and Darwinism, because Darwin himself wasn't necessarily big into religion, right? He was more into the human aspects of things and what turned more into like the modern humanist movement. But these occultists took what he did and they used it as a way to make it make sense to your evolutionary scale of moving into an ascended master.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they always use whatever's at the helm. It's not even them. I don't think it's the them. I think it's what they're tapping into, right? Who they're talking to. They know. I mean, these things always know exactly what to say and do to make a new religion almost every time. And they did that with science as well, to your point.
They did. And we're definitely going to get into some of these characters that were big into science, which, by the way, when we really get into Rudolf Steiner, that's going to come up a lot because he was big into science. But to even move to a more recent character before we get into Casey, but Alice Bailey, big when it comes to the Akashic Records. And she was the first one to coin the term New Age. And she was the more modern version of Theosophy. She helped start what was originally the Lucifer printing, formed into the Lucis Trust. And I did an entire episode about the Lucis Trust, which also funds and helps the UN now, which is a whole nother rabbit hole to go down, but she's a big part of that. And on the Lucis Trust website, they've got all of her books. You can literally go there and read all of her Theosophical books, which I pulled some information from because I went directly to the source. I love reading about stuff, but then I love reading the stuff because that's when I find out that the stuff is a little more in depth than somebody talking about or, writing about what they said. And she wrote this book called Union Achieved and Its Results. And in book 3, part 2, she talks specifically about what the Akashic Record is. And she says the Akashic Record is like an immense photographic registering all the desires and earth experiences of our planet. Those who perceive it will see pictured therein. And she maps out several different ones. And I'm not going to go through all of them today, but she talks about the life experiences of every human being since time began. So Heidi, this is a record of everything everyone's done from the past, present, and future. And if you have the ability to tap into this, you can not only see into the past in events that have been supposedly covered up. And I'm not a complete pushback on hidden history because I do believe there's a lot of hidden history, but I do draw the line sometimes because I think some things get way out of pocket where it's like, now you're just pulling out of thin air and you don't have any basis to what you're talking about. But according to these occultists, they were able to pull into the past. And I know we're going to get into Rudolf Steiner and root races and all of that because that's where he pulled it from, was the Akashic. But she talks about this too. Then she says reactions to experiencing the entire animal kingdom. So she's pulling from the animal kingdom as well. This is where it gets fun. The aggregation of the thought forms of karmic nature based on desire of every human unit throughout time, Aaron lays the great deception of the records. Only a trained occultist can distinguish between actual experience and those astral pictures created by imagination and keen desire. Now, what do you think about that, Heidi? The fact that, not everybody can tap into it, but you need to be trained. But you got to be special. Mm-hmm. You got to have that special blood or whatever that they create in that moment, that you need to be the special one.
Yes. Well, she's pretty full of herself in this one too. The rays and the initiations. This one talks a lot about this as well. And basically about how the master himself is not static and his field of work is clear and it's all a lot of woo woo. And wouldn't you feel so empowered? I mean, if you're going to be God, like you are God, we are all God, like that. That is such a weird dynamic for me, right? But this is what it is for them. So, uh, yeah, it's not the
Yeah,
best.
it's super wild. And the fourth thing she talks about, and this is really going to hit hard with Steiner, she talks about the planetary, and she puts this in quotations, dweller on the threshold, with all that appertains to that term and all the aggregations of forms which are to be found in its environment. The trained seer has learned to dissociate that which pertains to his own aura and the aura of the planet, which is actuality the Akashic Records. So the aura of the planet is part of the Akashic record that you can tap into. And she talks about that the trained adept can distinguish between the records and something that's not the records. But to get to these records, you have to get to the dweller on the threshold. Now, if you know anything about biblical knowledge, about thresholds, allowing things into your home, into your threshold, there are things at the threshold. Jesus is at the threshold. That is, these entities are also mimicking a distorted version of that as well. So this leads into all kinds of mythologies and lore of vampires at the threshold, dogmen at the threshold, entities at the threshold, demonic entities being allowed in because you told them they can come in. But this dweller of the threshold is a little different in this aspect because it's at the threshold of you getting through it. So once you have been able to tap into what this entity wants you to, and you can move past it, then you can start moving through the stages of the astral to then get the desired knowledge to be able to take back down to earth to then create religions and deceive people.
And never forget, right? So you don't forget. Because if you come back, say you got hit by a car tomorrow and you have to come back, you're supposed to remember all that stuff because you're better than everybody else. So yeah. And you have to come back, white and delightsome.
It's actually true, though,
It
that
is.
you have to come back. They tell you to come back because a lot of people who get to the upper echelon levels, they don't want to leave and they want to stay there. But they tell them that, no, you can't stay here yet. You are trained enough to be here. We'll allow you to be here eventually, but you need to bring more people to us. Now, tell me that's not the wildest thing in the world you ever heard of. You need to bring more people to us.
It does go back to the whole Mormon thing when we talked about what exactly they're doing with their ceremonies and what exactly they're containing in those temples. And, when you learn symbolism, right? Symbolism is everything, it's everywhere. And I just can't help but think about the things that they're doing and attaching to people, and then they're locking them down because of the way the pentagram is facing on the temple. It's upside down, and it just goes into witchcraft. And this is just another form of witchcraft, right? It's like the light witchcraft, and it's the better witchcraft, and it's not witchcraft now. It's something different than that because we said so, and we're going to write all these wordy books about it. And I mean, I'm like you, I'm always studying, but at the end of the day, I can see if you did not have like a firm foundation in Jesus as your savior, this would be a good sale. Like, you're going to be God.
I agree with that. And I think my biggest argument towards any of these practices, and honestly, even versions of Christianity that require you to do X amount of things to then get to God. I got a big problem with that because that's why Jesus came. He came to make it simple, not make it difficult. Now, the road is less traveled. And yes, it's smaller. Yes, it's tough. And yes, you're going to run into issues. Are you told to study your Bible and actually study it? Ed Mabry uses this terminology a lot. He says that everybody can read it, but do you study it? Do you let it enhance your life? Now that's growth. That's evolution. That's the kind of evolution we're talking about here, is growth to be able to help other people and then be able to grow yourself. So you're able to interact with the world around you in a better way. And to your point earlier, Heidi, about us and what we've been through and how we've come out of it, and looking back on the egos that we had and who we thought we were, I found myself way more selfless and wanting to help others, wanting to work for nonprofit organizations to help others around me, to do things that are outside of my normal comfort zone because I feel led to do it. You know, it's one thing for you and I to get on the podcast and talk about these things and hopefully help people that way, right? But it's also another to get out in the real world and help people that are less fortunate. And I think we're called to do that. And to your point earlier about some of these Gnostics and occultists, they're doing it too. It's not that they're not. Hey, I came from Freemasonry. We helped a lot of people, a lot of very unfortunate people in unfortunate situations. And it wasn't done out of hate or some sort of convoluted way to trick people. It really was of good intentions. But what is the real reason you're doing it at the root core? Are you doing it to make yourself feel better about some of the bad things you're doing? Or are you actually doing it to help people? I think that's a very important thing to look at when we're looking at why we're here on this earth in the first place.
Yeah. If it's a checkbox, like if it's to go up a level, if it's to, go to heaven, ultimately I want to make it there. But that in that moment, it should be about just pure compassion, right? If you're walking past somebody, this just happened to me in the middle of Seattle, and we're leaving and he's on the side of the road and I can clearly see he has wounds on his feet to the point where he's going to lose his feet. He didn't have socks, and I stopped, and my husband's like, are you going to go talk to that guy? I'm like, give me your socks. Like, stop, like get in your bag and get as many socks as you can get. And like, I didn't wake him up. I didn't like bother him or anything. I just put him by his shoes. Like, he probably just thinks they came from, I don't know where, but like in that moment, right? That compassion has to be a part of who you are, not just what you do. Like, I think it's really important that happens. And often I've said, like, I'm going to make a t-shirt and I need to update my t-shirt store that says, I'm sorry for what I said when I was Mormon, because I just didn't have that. It didn't mean I wasn't helping people.
That's a crazy shirt.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Oh God, that's great.
It's good, right? They're good people. They're good people like you. Like, you did good things. Like, you weren't a bad guy when you were in that, but why were you doing it? Like, is it at the core of your being? Did you have some kind of feeling about it? Like, or were you checking the box to the next thing?
It was a facade. Yeah. I knew what I was doing was not good. Like, I had nefarious purposes behind what I was doing. I didn't feel like I was doing great things, but I did community service. I did things to mask the fact that I also had this other very demonically led side to me that I was more than happy to push if I was going to get what I wanted to get out of life, right? So for me, doing those things for people wasn't done just out of the kindness of my heart. I really didn't care. I will say, though, that I've always had a very open nature to people and always wanted to help people. That's always been at the root core of me. So that's why I never had a problem doing it. I really did a manual 180 to follow a lot of the evil practices I was doing. It was very much against who I was as a person, just in general, because I wanted what I wanted to get. So I was willing to, here it comes, sacrifice who I really was to obtain those things. Sometimes the sacrifice isn't you're often somebody in your family or some crazy aspect of, I'm on top of a mountain, cutting my hands and, praying to both or whatever, right? It's not that. Sometimes it's just sacrificing who you really are. And I think that was a lot of the trouble that I ran into when I was following these paths.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank heavens we both came out, because it's a different thing now. Like, that feeling when you do something genuine, just stop and help somebody, like, it's a different thing. And I do think that's actually tapping in, but not to this other stuff, not to this fake God, right? Not to this false light. It's real. And they have dimmed that so bad for us. Like, from the air to the water to the food to the what's, like, to all the things, right? Like, and Steiner knew some of this. Steiner talks about some of this with his predictions, and it's great, and we'll talk more about it. But like, also, I don't think he understood the full meaning of God, or he wouldn't be messing with it, just like John D, right? Like, you don't look
Right.
to angels and things for all, like, who do you go to? Go to God.
Why is it that these occultists, and this directly ties into the Akashic Records, are these occultists so consumed with talking to God's messengers instead of God himself? That's the big issue that I have. When Yeshua came and sacrificed himself and then was risen from the dead, he beat death, hell, and the grave. He did all of that. And he made it a very simple process for us to come to him. Why is it that people feel the need to make it so difficult? And you could just go to the source. Why do you have to go to his emissaries? Why is that a requirement? And that's the problem that I have with it. Now, to say that people who are Christian don't have supernatural experiences or angelic beings don't meet with them, that's in the Bible. So when someone tells me that they have, and I listen to their story and I feel like, oh, this is matching up with the Bible, I tend to believe them more because, okay, yeah, you probably did have a supernatural event that happened and an angelic being came and helped you. But you always notice when these angelic beings come, who do they point back to? Always. They always point back to Yahweh. They always point back to God. And they don't ever take the
It's not their glory. Mm-hmm.
glory for themselves. Correct. So they don't take that glory for themselves. They always point back to God. And I think that's what we have to look at when we're looking at these supernatural experiences. But to your point, with these Gnostics and occultists, oh, you need to get to the angels first. The beings are the ones that help you because God really is just this overarching, he doesn't care about us really. He's just the monad. He is there and really doesn't care about us. We have to work our way to even get close to him. These beings are our best shot.
Well, and I think the best thing I ever heard an occultist say when somebody asked, it was in a book, I can't remember which one, I wished I could. Why do you do that? They said, because it works. And I'm like, oh, that's powerful, right? Like, how do you fight that? Because God sometimes doesn't, right? Like, God works in his way, not our way. So this is a control situation, right? This is like, and how wonderful that is for somebody like that's had an abusive background or whatever the case may be. Like, you crave that. You crave that control of your destiny. I know I did, because I did come from that kind of background. And it gives it back to me, right? Like, oh, you can choose, you can figure out the passwords and go and do the things and all this stuff. And you can get past all these, sentinels and angels at the veil because I know the things, blah, blah, blah. But like, at the end of the day, did that even help me? Did that make me feel some kind of way? Like, some people say it does, but as for me, and I'm certainly glad that God, I think, was always with me from a young age. Actual God. I didn't listen as much until later, but I knew who he was. And I think that saved me. I really do. Yeah. We got lucky.
That's awesome. And I think that's where we should all strive to be. And we're going to get into the Akashic Records and how that's tied into the Book of Life here pretty soon too. And we're talking about Edgar Cayce. So that's a whole other bag of worms. But I want to talk a little bit about Theosophy's version of Akasha. It's a little different than Akashic Records. Now, I know you may say, well, wait a minute. You just were reading from Alice Bailey's book and she's from Theosophy. Yeah and no. She's the modern version of Theosophy, which is a little different than the original version. And I've talked about this on the show where Crowley loved the original version of Theosophy. When he came to the States, he tried to eradicate it. Matter of fact, he tried to take it over because he did not like the more modern version of what Alice Bailey ended up becoming and pushing. He hated it. And that's when this Akashic record really came to the forefront. It was more in the modern version of that. But the original version, it is similar, but it's not. And it doesn't actually use the word Akashic Records. It just uses the word Akasha. And the first time that it's really talked about is in The Secret Doctrine, which is a book by Helena Blavatsky. It's one of her big 2-volume books she wrote in 1888. And the first volume is called Cosmogenesis. And the second volume, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, is called Anthropogenesis. And she gets really deep into the ideas of Theosophy. And this is where she gets into the Akasha. And in volume 2, she says, Akasha is something far greater and definitely more important than is realized by most people who casually use the word. So here we go. So she's saying, well, that Sanskrit word, Akasha, that you see that means the aether and space and all that, it's actually more important than that. Let me tell you the secrets that the entities told me. So the Mahatmas told me over in Tibet. So she says that the Akasha can be defined in a few words. It is the universal soul. So I know you've heard a lot about that, Heidi, the universal soul and what we can tap into there. That's typically where people say that they can pull the download from, is from this universal consciousness, right? Then you got the matrix of the universe, the mysterium magnum from which all exist. And that really reminds me of the prima materia and what these ancient alchemists said that was the essence of God. This is what she's talking about here. And she says that from which all that exists is born by separation or differentiation. It is the cause of existence. It fills the infinite space. It's space itself in one sense, in both its sixth and seventh principles. And then she goes on to say that the universal cause in it is unmanifested unity and infinity. So she's basically saying that this is the universal life force. She actually uses the life force at one point when she talks about the Akasha. It's the internal divine consciousness. It's unconditioned, undifferentiated, and infinite. So this is typical, what I would say would be the Azoth or the prima materia. This is what the alchemists were trying to achieve a lot of times in their magnum opuses. They were trying to get to this God juice. That's the funny way that I can say it. That's basically what it was. And she reformatted it into Akasha. So this Akasha is the essence of all things, but it contains all things. So that's typically where people get the idea of the records from, because if you can tap into the God juice, oh, you're a God. You can tell anybody anything. You can go find whatever you want to find.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, and Steiner likes to call it, they all, like we said, Akashic field. But at the end of the day, this is forbidden knowledge. Like, that is what it is. Like, are we supposed to know everything? No. Are we supposed to know, all this stuff laid before us about anybody? No. Now, are there people now with Casey? We'll get there, but I will defend him in this point. He was not awake and never chose at that time. Now, what does that mean for him? I don't know if he had an entity. I don't know if he invited it there. I don't know if he did a ceremony. So it all makes a difference, right? Because like you said, there are gifts from God, right? And there's a quick way to test this, fast and quick. If you happen to be one of those people that are clairvoyant, which all these people are very obsessed with, to be able to go and tap into this, you have to be clairvoyant. And for that, you can say, God, and get on your knees and pray. If you've given me this, then let it stay. And if this isn't what you've given me and I've attained it by some other way, then take it from me. And there you go. And I mean, if you didn't do a ceremony or anything, I'm guessing it's probably yours, but that's an extra special way to make sure, right? Like, there are clairvoyants in Christianity. I'm not throwing everything out. I don't know where Casey lands with that. He's harder. Steiner and these guys, we can dissect them and get into like their 6,050th stuff that they talked about and go, yeah, okay, right here, this seems not quite right, but
Right.
Casey's harder because he really was, I think deep down he was a Christian, but like I said, anything can channel in.
Well, they said he was devout,
yeah,
and that he was deeply involved with Christianity. But then again, I can go read that. So was John Dee. Right. So at the end of the day, how much was he? And we're going to get into Casey here in just a little bit. And we'll talk about some of the actual times that he was asleep and people were writing and watching him while he slept and what he was saying. It's very interesting. I think I'd like to run some of this by a person that I'm really good friends with, and she is very knowledgeable in these aspects, Vicky Joy Anderson, and she is just super knowledgeable when it comes to the astral realm and what's going on there from a Christian perspective. And I'd love to know what she thinks about Edgar Cayce as a whole. I typically lean more towards the occult. However, there are aspects of it that don't make sense, like you said, too, where it's, okay, I know that people can. And we know biblically where people have prophesied that were given information directly from God or from an angelic messenger. So we know this exists. We know that people can, but what was the real purpose behind it? Because, Casey was labeled by the mainstream as being a kook, a quack,
Right.
but what he was predicting was spot on almost every single time, which is even more mind-blowing.
And he was not in it for money. He died very poor. Like, he didn't ever require, he could have made a lot of money doing this. Like, he could have just been like, yep, money, money, money. You line up, your appointment's Friday, just like a doctor. Really, he could have done that, but he didn't. And so for me, I'm like, he said some crazy things. That's where it gets into the occult nature, because you're like, wait a minute. What are you talking about? But also he's like, he would wake up and say, I never said that. Is this an angel? Is this a demon? Is this, like, we would have to know, like, did you do the bornless ritual? Like, what are you doing over there? I don't know those answers for him yet, And so I don't think that he's ever been documented as doing the occultic nature, like these different ether piercing rituals, right? That the Mormons do, that the Masons do, that the Theosophy people do, the Anthroposophy, like they all do something with Casey. I'm going to have to research that tonight and see, did he ever do anything specific,
I think, to me, and we can just move right into Casey now, because there's a lot going on there and it seem to be moving that way, which is great. One of the big things with Casey, and just to give people a little background on who he was just shortly, he was an American clairvoyant who reported and chronicled an ability to diagnose diseases and recommended treatments for ailments while asleep. That's just one of the things he did. He also, during thousands of transcribed sessions, he would answer questions on a variety of subjects. And this is where, when you look at the subjects that he was asked and that he was reporting on, I have a tough time buying into, was he as devout a Christian as he said he was, because he would talk about subjects like healing, which I don't have a problem with that. But then it was reincarnation. Then it was dreams, the afterlife, past lives. So an erector reincarnation again. Nutrition, nothing bad there. Atlantis. Now that's a weird topic for me. I do tend to think that there was an Atlantis at one point. But is it what the Theosophists and what these people who were tapping into the Akashic Records saying that these root races came from? I don't necessarily think that either. But Casey described himself, to your point, as a devout Christian. And he denied being a spiritualist or communicating with spirits. So that's the weird part, because he's answering questions that don't seem very Christian that people are coming to him with. Now, we don't have the answers to all those questions either. Was he giving them the answers of saying, hey, this isn't real, this isn't right, you should follow your Bible?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the answer to that per se. We just know that he was answering these questions, these weird questions. And he's also regarded as a founder and the principal source of many characteristics in the New Age movement. So it's tough for me, because a lot of New Agers love him and they follow what he said and follow what he did. But was this just a corruption of what he did on a good sense? I typically think no, but at the end of the day, we don't have the exact answer. So I'm kind of like you, where I probably lean more towards, there's a negative thing going on here, but was he actively knowing he was doing something negative? I think that's the big question.
Yeah.
He may have thought that, hey, this is all from God. I'm going to sleep and I'm giving people the right answers.
And then we always look at things like, okay, look at the Catholic Church. We'll pick on a different church for a day. They make these people into idols, right? Like John the Baptist never wanted to be a statue, and neither did Jesus. And they're kissing. Like, I don't know if you've been to Italy, but all the statues, like it's almost rubbed completely off from them, like touching it or kissing it, and you're like, okay, these people never asked for this, though. This is weird,
right?
Yeah. So maybe he was one of them. Like, and I know that he was literally shocked. He was regarded as the sleeping prophet because he really would wake up and say, I didn't say that. Like, I would never say that. Like, I believe in this. I don't believe in reincarnation. You know, he was really offended by it. And so I think anytime we invoke, and we have to be so careful because like there's a lot of things, right? Mormonism, you're invoking. Catholics invoke on accident. Like these people are doing ancient rituals that they don't understand. Whether they do them correctly or not, I don't know if that matters. If you happen to be what? Clairvoyant, like, and you tap into something or you have a certain bloodline or whatever happens. And then back to your point, then did something cross the threshold on accident? Like, who knows, right? But if you're invoking it on purpose, if it's purposeful, you're doing these certain rituals, then 100%, no wavering. But with Casey, ooh, I'm going to have to see if he ever has been talked about doing a ritual, which I doubt. But was he Roman Catholic? Do you know? I don't know if he was.
He wasn't Roman Catholic. He actually came from a weird sect of Christianity during the Second Great Awakening. And that's where he was really influenced. And he followed the disciples of Christ. So it was a church and it was sought to restore the original Christian teachings and practices. And he was actually raised in that group, which was the disciples of Christ.
So the disciples of Christ, if it's, I'm going to have to look at this. So the very first church that, you know, Joseph Smith ever founded was called the Church of Christ. And it's during the same time frame, the same area. And actually, it wasn't just his ideas. His his cousin on his grandpa's side, Johnny Smith, was at Yale teaching these things. And what was he completely immersed in? He was like all about Eastern, like mysticism type stuff. And he was this language professor and everything. So I wonder, I've got to look at this. I wonder if that has anything to do with it's some very similar name.
Generally, what I've looked into, and I haven't looked into it a lot, but the Disciples of Christ, they're more of a group that was trying to restore primitive Christianity. They were trying to move Christianity to that phase that was before the Roman Catholic Church that came along. And that's kind of why the Reformation happened when the Protestants came to be, because they were pushing back against what the Roman Catholic Church was trying to turn Christianity into. I love how people forget that period of time before the Roman Catholic Church came in, because there was this version of Christianity that was true Christianity. It was that version after Christ left. They were persecuted, and also the Essenes spawned out of that too. So you had Gnostic Christianity that was like slipping around here on the back end. So then when Roman Catholicism came and said, this is Christianity, well, then the Essenes were like, no, we're the real ones. But the real Christianity was being lost in the shuffle. And that's when Protestantism came to fruition through the Reformation, was because they were pushing back on all of it, saying that, no, we're trying to restore the primitive part. Now, again, I haven't looked too deep into the Disciples of Christ movement to know exactly all the characters involved with it. And from what I've seen, though, it's a lot of Baptists that come out of it. So they call it the Restoration Movement, and that was in 1832.
So I guess in this little, I had to Google it really quick. It says both denominations have roots in the 19th century American Restoration Movement, and the split, so they were together, occurred around 1906 when the Churches of Christ began to separate from the Disciples of Christ to maintain practices they believed were mandated by the New Testament. That's insane. Like, I didn't expect to find that there, even though we know there's a magical rock with Casey and, you know, talking to things. And anytime there's a rock, even if there's not a hat, you've got my full attention.
Exactly. And that's why I've been very weird when it comes to Casey, because Casey has these weird things that when you start tracking them back, like, wait a minute, that doesn't really add up with true Christianity, even if they're pushing that they're true Christianity, right? There's always some weird mystical element that's involved with it. And that's typically what it was with Casey. He had this weird mystical element. And I want to definitely talk about the Book of Life, because that really piqued my interest when he attributed the Akashic Records to that. But this is another interesting thing about Casey, that he wasn't a doctor, and he had these interesting things that happened him not being a doctor, but being able to predict through quote unquote sleeping readings how to diagnose people. So he would either bring people physically in the room with him, like townspeople or whatever else. Sometimes they'd correspond to him through letters. So they'd write him letters, and he would make his diagnosis through these sleeping readings. So if they weren't present, it was sufficient enough if he had the letters. And so his prescriptions were unorthodox, and they would include things that you and I might agree with when it comes to taking care of your body, things that would be outside of the mainstream pharmaceutical sources. He would talk about your diet, magnetism, massage, and relaxation, sands on the beach, stuff like that. It would be, hey, maybe you just need to rest. Maybe you're pushing yourself too hard. Things that doctors should probably tell people more, but they're like, hey, you take these pills. And to your point earlier, he never would take money for his readings, but that's not always indicative of you being holy either, because sometimes people do that out of a self-serving sense of, oh, I'm good. I'm a good person because I'm not charging people for this. Or sometimes it's a deceptive motive too, that, well, I'm not charging people for this, but I'm luring them in because of what knowledge I can give them. And the best part is he did them all in his sleep. All readings, prescriptions, everything he gave was in this astral realm that he was in.
And it continues to this day. Like you can go to the Casey institute or something, and the same things apply, right? They lay on the beach, and there's like these weird things that they do, but a lot of people say they get healing from it. Now, do I doubt that? Look, I don't doubt that you could probably heal even yourself with some things. Like the power of the mind is so valuable. But do I think that God does it? Yeah, for me, it's God. Like, I think most of the time it's God. But do I doubt that like some people with their diet changes and like maybe they're stressed out and relax? Like, no, I'm not tossing everything out, but we have to look at the root of it, right? And I mean, like even my mom back when I was young, she was super into crystals, and I always used to think, not that it was terrible, right? Like, but as a kid, I was like, yeah, I don't know. And even as a child, I was like, this just doesn't seem like we need this piece. Like, not saying they're terrible or anything. Like, if it makes you feel better, that's your life. But as for me, I just think that there's nothing between me and God that he can't take on. I mean, it's God.
That's another one of those weird middle ground topics. And I've barely touched it on the show.
Crystals. Oh my goodness.
But the interesting thing about these types, especially quartz and some of these other ones, they do have inherent properties with them. They actually have some healing properties that are involved too. And I don't think God just created them not to do those things. I think that he did, but it depends on how that you're using them. Are you sitting there chanting mantras over them? Are you spreading them around and acting a fool with them using occult practices and rituals? I know people like that, and they will
mental picture. And I'm sorry, I laughed. I'm like, I can see this right now. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I don't think they're inherently wrong either. I'm with you. I think that they probably do hold vibrational properties and things that are created for good, right? There's a reason why that people are seeing UFOs going in and out of cave systems that are known to have quartz, and they're mining them down there. Why are they taking it if it doesn't hold some sort of property, right? So I do think there's something to it, but it's also a slippery slope of what you're using them for. And then it's now you're relying on them.
Right.
And if you start relying on those things, then now you've taken your mind and eyes off of God. And now those things have become your idol, have become your God. And I think that falls right in line with even iconography, like the golden calf.
Yeah, it could be like, look, anything could be made an idol. And I think that's the point, is balance in everything, right? Like if we use alternative medicine, I use a tiger balm, right, for my back because it hurts all the time. Is that bad inherently? No. But like, you have to know where your mind is. Like, am I, like you said, chanting, running around my house, doing some kind of invoking? Like, I'm not doing that, slap it on, move on with the day. Like, and I'm definitely putting things in God's hands first. And I think that's the thing, is a lot of people that are Gnostic will say, oh, well, you do that, or you put eucalyptus in your house or something, and then now you're just like me, or you're a pagan. I said that once. I said, I feel closest to God outside, and somebody called me a pagan. And I was like, I mean, are you serious right now? Like we can't have anything, right? They want us locked into like this whole like this is Christianity and that's all. And I'm not saying that. Yeah.
It doesn't really work that way. And I'll tell you an interesting story. I don't think I've ever told it on this show, but if you watch the Shape of Shadows film that we did, the way the film starts, you'll see a Native American man. His name was John, and he worked with us a lot on that trip. And he is from two separate tribes, and he's like a quarter white, and he's traveled the world. So this guy is just, oh my God, the knowledge this guy had on so many different aspects of culture and places he'd been. Like he lived in Turkey for a while. So he had this whole idea of the way the Turkish lived, but he was very in tune with Native American culture, but he was also a Christian. So at the beginning of the film, you'll see him with sage, and you'll see him with sage on the property. The interesting thing was he was not chanting anything occultic. He was not using any kind of rituals. He was praying to God, to Yahweh. He was actually praying to God when he did it. This was just his form of what he believed was his connection to God. And I don't know how I feel about that. We all talked about that when it happened. And from all indications, we talked to him for days. We were out there for a week, and he seemed like a pretty solid Christian guy. And he knew what demonic entities were. He wasn't in any kind of disillusion with what those things were or to other gods and those type of things. He believed there was one God. He believed we had our creator. He understood that a lot of the practices in Native American culture weren't right, and he was able to differentiate that. But the sage thing is another aspect of, is that just a practice? Is that just something that he is using in his connection to God? That's how he does it. It would be very similar to someone getting on their knees and praying to God, right? You don't have to get on your knees to pray to God. You can walk and talk with God. You can do whatever you want. And that's your connection to God. So is that his personal connection to God and what he feels like is connecting him to God? Or is it something that's new age or occult in nature? So again, it's kind of a gray area,
Roman
and I
Catholics
do
it,
agree
right?
with you.
Yeah, they take the
Correct.
they take
Oh
the
yeah,
thing,
for sure.
and I'm like, okay, at some point though, like what is a ritual versus what is the truth? And this gets scary. Like honestly, okay, let's play with this one. God's name. Lord. Do we call him Lord? Oh my gosh. Then I read a bunch of stuff about Lord, right? And I'm like, and then I read a bunch of stuff and I was like, I used to call him Father too. And now I'm like, And so at what point do they're just trying to destroy everything, right? Do I not think that
Right.
God knows who I'm talking to when I'm talking to God? Like I'm talking to
Correct.
God. And I mean, I try to get specific now, right? Like I'm like the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or in Jesus Christ of Nazareth name, because at this point I'm terrified, right? Because I'm like,
I went through a phase like that myself, and I actually got out of it. And there's some very interesting concepts in the Bible that talk about God's ability to override things that have been brought in to Christianity or just in the world in a negative way, right? We could argue, and this is a description that I use a lot to help people with this. We could argue that our phones are portals. They're scrying tools. As a matter of fact, we could go all the way back to the father of computers, who was Charles Babbage, who was a major alchemist and occultist who helped bring around the computer. So the computer itself is built with nefarious purposes. Every device we have in our home is built with nefarious purposes. So are we not allowed to use these devices because we know of the origins of them? Or does God know our hearts and our true intentions? Right. We shouldn't use things if we know they're negative, right? In the sense of, okay, this is an upside down cross and I'm praying to Lucifer. That's not going to work, right? There are things that we know. And also God impresses on your heart what you should and shouldn't do too. How in tune are you with God? How much are you listening to God? Those things are important. And I think that if we're constantly looking at the devil behind every bush, we're never going to live a full life because we're never going to enjoy life. We're always going to see the negative aspects of it. So to that point, I encourage people to speak to God the way that you want to speak to him and commune with him because he is your friend. I know it's a tough concept for people to understand, but he actually is. He's so much your friend that he came and died for you. So in that aspect, he's even more than that. But he's not just some being that we can't connect to. It's tough for our finite minds to think that way. But when I started getting into more of how I wanted to talk to God, sometimes I talk to the Holy Spirit. I talk to that aspect of God. Sometimes I talk to Yeshua or Jesus. I talk to that aspect of God, or sometimes I talk to the Father, depending on how I'm feeling. It's all going to the same entity, the same being that created us, because it's a triune. But I do talk to God in different ways because of how I'm feeling. He knows
He
what
knows our
my
hearts.
purpose is when I come there.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm just talking to him while I'm in the gym working out, or something comes up in my mind while I'm driving down the road. I think that's important to do that throughout the day because it keeps you in a godly mindset as you move forward. And it doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes. It doesn't mean you're not going to, yell at your wife or your husband or act a fool one day and then you got to go back and apologize for it. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean those things because we're human, we're fallible, we make mistakes, but are we working towards building something greater with him? And I think that ropes us back into this occult idea of what these occultists are doing. Are they doing this for reasons outside of their own ego? And I just don't think that they are.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, pray always and do not cease is in the Bible. And I think that there's so many people that are afraid to pray because they think that it has to be like some perfect way. No, I think, listen to what Joel said there. That's important. Like if you need God and you need to call on him in your mind and you can't speak that moment because you're in the middle of a grocery store, like you do what you need to do. Like some people say, yeah, just do it anyway and look crazy. I'm like, okay, but you can only do that so many times and you can't go to the store anymore. Right. And so
that's so true.
Yeah. I mean, use your mind and I think, with these guys that we're talking about, like it's such a slippery slope. And man, Steiner, like I look at so many things he said and I'm like, he seems great on the surface level. Dig a little deeper. Alice Bailey, same thing. Dig a little deeper. Madame Blavatsky. Like some of them are just like Crowley, where he's like, yeah, I just don't care. I don't care if I look bad, whatever, I got mine. He's kind of that guy.
Right.
But, with this stuff, I mean, how many musicians, you're a musician. How many people do you know that are like, oh, that song, it was just a download. And then it's like a weird song, right? Like Black Hole Sun.
Several.
Yeah.
Well, here's something interesting too. And I talked to Tony about this, and I don't think I've ever talked about this on the show. When I write music, I typically write fairly fast. I can write an entire song in 30, 45 minutes sometimes. And I don't necessarily remember all aspects of it. And I know that I'm in tune with God. And I know that when I sit down to write, there is a cognitive process that I'm a part of. It's not like I'm taken over by something
Right.
and it's some sort of automatic writing or something that these occultists go through. But there is an aspect of a spiritual download from God. There is an absolute aspect of that. I always say that the negative side is just a corruption of the good.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when we talk about astrology, right? It's a corruption of the Mazzaroth, because the Mazzaroth was the zodiac that was created by God that showed us through the stars of Jesus coming and what his impact would be on the earth. The astrology, which was taught by fallen entities in the book of Enoch, they were handed astrology over to mankind. This was the corruption of that. So we have to look at that in every aspect, that there's always this good counterpart. So the download exists. When you are connected to the Holy Spirit gives you the download. There's a way, and I know some pastors that talk about this frequently. They will pray to God before they sleep to give them the answers. They will wake up the next morning with the answer. They've got it. It happened in their dreams. They get the download and it is given to them. We have to stop as Christians being fearful of the astral, being fearful of the spiritual aspect of reality, because that is a important part of us. I think the deception is that Christianity gets you away from the spiritual aspects that we're supposed to be in tune with, which we originally were in the Garden of Eden. What's happened is specifically through the Roman Catholic Church, has devoided us away. And I bring up the Roman Catholic Church only because they were the first ones to make Christianity this world religion, right? They, over time, devoided us away from the supernatural aspects of the Bible, while simultaneously you had the Gnostics and the occultists on the other end offering the answers, but in a convoluted, deceptive way. So you had both of these going on at the same time. And from the outside looking in, you've got two aspects of Christianity fighting each other, when actually the true aspect of Christianity is something devoid of both of them.
Mhm.
It is the aspect of we are in tune with God and the spiritual world, just not through rituals and occult practices and us becoming gods. That's the difference between the two. We can receive the download. There are times I prayed and woke up the next morning. I could even say recently,
But
I
you prayed.
was trying to
You
get
set the stage.
correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And I was in kind of a battle about what I needed to do about something. And I prayed about it as I was going to sleep. And I actually received it when I woke up around 2, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. I don't remember what it was. I woke up and I was half asleep, but the answer was there. Oh, that's the answer. And now I'm very, very much in tune with that's what I need to do. But that was because that I went to the Father. I went directly. I didn't ask for Gabriel or Samael or any of these emissaries. That's not who you're talking to. I'm not talking to past saints. I'm talking directly to the Creator. And I think that's what's been missing from Christianity, is the ability to go directly to the source.
Right. Or making it your own ghost library, as in the case of, many of these people. Like, how easy would it be to disguise something that you learned from a being that you're invoking purposely? And they know how to do this, and they do it. There's so many rituals. I already mentioned one. There's so many rituals that they do. And then they're like, oh, but it just came to me. No, it just came to you because you prayed and that was all. And some people are going to come at us and say, well, that's a ritual too. Look, we could debate this all day long. That's like reading some of this work. Everything is nothing and nothing is everything and everything is God and nothing is God. And I mean, if you want to go crazy, just read all that for on and on. You'll never get your answer and you don't feel fulfilled. But how do you feel when you read the Bible? Like, it's different. So yeah, I'm sure people will say what they want with it. I mean, especially Gnostics, because they have their own views on things, and Christian mysticism and magical practices and all the things that go along with it. And I'm not saying it doesn't work. It does. It does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. And coming from someone who was involved with those practices, I can tell you verbatim they work. I would do something and an entity would appear and give me some sort of answer or give me some sort of deception, which I would realize even when I wasn't following God, I would realize 2 weeks later, that wasn't right. They tricked me. Then you're mad, but then you still want to get to them because they've got something for you. And that's kind of how they get you on the hook too. They might give you a little something like, well, they did give me this though. So this happened. And you get that in your mind, and that's how they get you roped in too. And listen, all occultists and Gnostics will tell you that entities can deceive. And they'll even say, we'll talk directly on the next episode about Rudolf Steiner, speaking specifically to the fact that entities can present themselves as something good and they're not actually good. But then how do you differentiate that, right? You're in this astral realm with them. How do you know? Oh, because we've done enough practice. We've done enough rituals. So once you've achieved that level, then you know when they're good or not. You don't. When you're in that astral realm, you do not know.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you that right now, we are not capable enough to know the difference. And to get to that Akashic record again, and this Edgar Cayce idea of it being the book of life. So this was an interesting concept too. And I'm going to go to Revelation 20:12, and John talks about this from Patmos, and he says, I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of these things which were written in the books according to their works. So if we want to go even further, the book of life could also represent our bio-identification, fingerprints, irises, DNA. It could have everything encoded in it. So the idea of the Akashic records being a real thing, I think it is. And I think it's the book of life. But I don't think that the a human can tap into the actual book of life. Now, is it a deceptive book of life that's being represented, this Akashic Records? I think so. And I think these entities that are masquerading as good angels, they probably are angels, but they're masquerading as that. They're presenting us information from this quote unquote book of life, that they are giving information out that's, this is good. It's from the actual book of life. We talk about it in the Bible. Just give this to the person asking the questions in Casey's case, or go to people and give them this information, and we can start this religion, this cult, or this organization out of it. And that's what typically happens. To your point earlier, where you said that, hey, go write this book.
Yep.
Well,
Constant.
why?
Constant. I'm like, yeah, geez, every single one of these people, like, if you look at not just weird cults and weird religion, just religion. And I think, to your point, it is to distract us from connection with God. And how well does it work if your brain is so busy? Like, oh, I've got to do this, and I've got to do that, and I've got to do this, and church duties here, there, everywhere, or your stuff that you did, lodge stuff here, there, everywhere, meetings. I mean, you're so busy that I don't know that you ever take time to really connect, right? And then you just want to numb out. Like, and then there's people tapping into this stuff now with ayahuasca and all these different things that they're using. And I'm like, hey, did you ever think maybe you're going into somewhere you shouldn't be? Like, I don't doubt you went to a realm, but what if you're not supposed to be there? And what if this is really bad? Whether it's clairvoyant or drug induced or fear induced for me, with the temple.
Agreed. And to that clairvoyant piece, this kind of drives us into a character called Harmon Hartzell Bro. His last name's literally Bro. So I thought that was funny. I thought I had read a mistype or something. Bro. I've never heard of somebody's last name Bro. Like, what's up, bro? But it's literally Bro, B-R-O.
We're going to call him Bro.
And yeah, Harmon Bro, literally his name. He was a professor of philosophy and religion, and he specialized in parapsychological aspects of religious life. And he delved in like meditation, faith healing, mystical experiences, and conversion. And he lived and worked with Casey, and he was one of the witnesses to more than 600 psychic readings. And Bro's task was to write where Casey would find each patient and correspondent. And in the book that he wrote, because he wrote the most extensive book on Edgar Cayce of anybody out there. It's super extensive. Also, he was a ordained minister in the Disciples of Christ as well, by the way. So interesting. So I'm going to read a couple excerpts from the book. It's fascinating how on point, though, that Edgar Cayce's readings were. And this is another part that made me think that Edgar Cayce really had more nefarious things going on with him, whether knowingly or unknowingly, because some of the verbiage that came out of the readings. So this is Bro in his book. He says, for medical aid, this meant giving him the exact street address and sometimes an apartment or office at that location. In the past, he had shown that he would, if directed to the wrong place, patiently describe it in full and accurate detail, right down to the paint on the walls and stuffing in a mattress for searching for the person. He could search for them in his readings. He would pinpoint them, very similar to the CIA now. And they have people who can remote view. It's very similar to remote viewing. But when properly guided, he would repeat after his wife the complete address and then seem to move us through in narrowing orbits by citing out loud the state, then the city, then the street, and the building, concluding often with an aside on what he observed at the site before firmly stating, check this, yes, we have the body. Now note that Casey, and this is what Bro's writing, he says, note that Casey employed the first person plural we. He used the term the body to indicate he had found the seeker's page in the Akashic Records. So we is plural. It's not just Casey. It's him and something else that are finding this in the Akashic Records. Now it continues. There were colorful complications. An address I supplied for a man in Los Angeles was one we later found to be incorrect. Casey promptly commented that it was the wrong address, and his wife hesitantly suggested that he try to locate the person anyway. with something like a groan he observed of Los Angeles, and he repeated in his dreams now or his sleep, mighty big place. After a lengthy pause, he found the man in a huge urban tangle and presented to give the reading full of accurate personal details. He was able to track a dude down without even the info, and it was the right information. But that was that verbiage, and I told you I was going to get to that crazy verbiage where I feel like there's more to Casey in a nefarious part, whether he knew it or not, because he said, we have found the person. Well, who's we? Never said.
Oh boy. Well, and fascinating enough, like I said, I did mention a stone, and I'll go out more on this, later, but the 2-eye stone, he talks about this, and I just wonder, what maybe he never told the truth, right? Like, look at what happened with Joseph Smith. Like, everybody thought he was a nutto, or like, they followed him. It was one of the two. So maybe he kept it to himself because of that, right? Like, I don't know for sure.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
And maybe Casey was smart enough to keep the hidden occult aspects of what he was doing away, specifically because he was so adamant that he was a devout Christian and he wasn't a spiritualist. So he made that a point to let people know that. So if he was doing that, but he did things in secret that were tapping into the astral realm and talking to entities, we'd never know.
Well, we know it works because Puharich, look, like Puharich gets into all this stuff. And again, what do we get into? Like materials that help block things. This is why we get into Faraday cages, blah, 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 all these things. So obviously we know that some people can do this. And apparently Casey was one, so. Yeah.
Absolutely he was. And as I was digging through the Casey stuff, I got some very interesting things for some other people that are just kind of in passing that I thought was kind of cool. We could end this with, unless you have some more things to add about Casey. So if you have a few more things to add about Casey, we could do that now, and then I could tell you some fun stuff.
I'll wrap it with that, and then if I bring some stuff tomorrow, then just because I didn't have all my notes on Casey because I brought Steiner, but I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. I am going to do a little research on him and just make sure I didn't miss anything.
Yeah, no, that's no problem at all, because it'll fit right in with where we're moving into with Rudolf Steiner, because that's going to be the heavy hitter on what Rudolf really thought about these Akashic records. But there were a couple other people, 3 in particular, that I thought was really interesting. There was a guy, he was an Indian mathematician. His name was Srinivasa Ramanajan, and he was the man who knew infinity. He had no training in pure mathematics until the age of 10, and his contributions to various mathematical subfields is insane. Here's the best part. When he was brought in, he was running circles around guys who had been studying mathematics for 40 years.
Whoa.
They didn't even know how he was doing it, but he tells you how. He attributed his intuitive genius to a Hindu goddess. In his dreams, he would see blood drops that symbolized her male consort, and he would afterward be presented with visions of scrolls on which were written complex mathematical formulas. And he said, I'm quoting, "An equation for me has no meaning unless it represents a thought of God." So he was also a very early person to describe the Akashic records. Now, he never used those words per se, but this is what he was tapping into this astral realm. He was meeting with this Hindu goddess, and through the blood drops that symbolized her male consort, these mathematical equations would appear in these scrolls in his dreams, and then he would wake up and he would have all this knowledge. He was literally gifted the knowledge from the gods. I mean, there's no way you could say it. He literally was. And all of the people that heard him say that discredited him, but what they couldn't do was discredit what he knew. He was running circles around them at the University of Cambridge. As a matter of fact, he was the first Indian to become a fellow of Trinity College in Cambridge. And I've talked about Trinity College a lot because every single great alchemist, occultist, or mind has come out of Trinity College for the most part. Crowley did. We know that Charles Babbage, we talked about him. There are so many. And when I'm researching these people, wait a minute, they went to Trinity College too? This is crazy. They're all getting pumped out of Trinity College. And he was literally receiving this knowledge from a Hindu goddess in this astral realm and waking up and then running circles around the people that were also mathematicians, but had been doing it for many years more. He was running circles around them before 10. He didn't even have formal training until he was 10 years old, and he was crushing it at like 6 years old.
Wow.
And this is where they think that, well, this is what people who believe in tapping into the Akashic Records say. They think that child prodigies are actually autistic, or even people that are autistic that have this crazy knowledge about something, that they're able to tap into the Akashic. And this is where they're getting the knowledge from, and they're just able to do it because they're tapping into this, well, what Casey's talking about, the book of life, or the encoding of every person, past, present, and future. They're pulling from it. So when you're pulling from that, if you're able to, then you just know what to do. Now, if we want to say that the download exists and these people are receiving it from a good place, which I think that is a high possibility, then yeah, these people might be, right? But then there's this aspect of, man, you're talking to a Hindu goddess and she's dropping blood everywhere and the blood drops are turning into scrolls and they're giving you the knowledge. There's no other explanation for it. And even the people that hated what he said about it could not combat the results.
Wow.
And he has what they call the Lost Notebook, and it was discoveries from his last year of life. Mathematicians to this day are still trying to figure out everything in that book. And it was discovered in 1976. They're still trying to figure it out. It's so far advanced beyond their minds now. And that's where, for sure, he was tapping into some sort of entity that was giving him this knowledge.
Oh, yeah. Well, and every time it goes back to math for these things. So I'm not saying it's evil or anything. I'm not saying it's not God. I'm just saying there's a pattern there. So, John Dee loved math. He said God was all math. And I'm not saying that it's not. Look, I'm not. I just find it an interesting, like, maybe this is a God or not the God, right? Like,
I typically go to the idea that everything is math. And I think that what we're given, if it's given from entities, is the corrupted version of that. So I do think there's a perfect order. And I think that the way things are built are through math. Everything has to work precisely, right? Everything has to move precisely for things to operate in our mass existence. And if one little thing is off, everything crumbles.
Right.
So we have to look at it from that aspect, but where are you getting your info from, right? What is it? And is it the corrupted version?
Hopefully not drops of blood. Goodness.
It's wild. That's a whole wild one. But the fact that he's considered, if not but one of the top 2 or 3 mathematicians of all time, most consider him the best of all time. But, there's obviously some people would argue some other people, but he's considered in that top pantheon to this day. They can't figure out everything that he was coming up with.
I haven't heard of this one. That's wild. That is like,
it's really wild. Wow. And the fact that he is intertwined at the same college as the fellows of Trinity College is also wild, because so many names that come out of the fellows are involved in all kinds of secret societies and even started secret societies. So it's fascinating when you get down that rabbit hole of Trinity College and what was really going on there. And even to this day, we could argue it's interesting. But yeah, he's an interesting character. And I do believe that he was definitely tapping into some sort of download.
Oh, for sure. For sure on that one. That one, I mean, whoa.
It's wild. So we got another one, Elizabeth Chadwick, and she's a little more modern. She's still alive, and she was born in 1957, and she's the author of historical fictions. And most of her novels are from the medieval period, and she'll incorporate a lot of real historical characters in her books. And she does a lot of research to try to make it historically accurate on one point, but then it's highly fictional on the other end. So she has been writing these books, and she started with The Wild Hunt, which came out in 1990, but she was peddling books for a while. She was winning awards, but nobody would really take her on board to publish her. Well, she ended up getting with a publishing company, and she ended up getting really big, and she's written tons and tons of books. This is interesting. And you can go to her website and check this out, which I did. And she has an entire website page on her website called the Akashic Record. And she has a friend called Allison King. They've been friends since they were children. And Allison King also has a website, which interestingly enough, when I went to the original website and clicked on where it said, click here to visit Allison's website, broken link. It doesn't exist anymore. It's not even around. So I'm like, okay, well, you can't reach out to her now because she was a consultant, an Akashic consultant is what she called herself. So here's what's interesting. So they're hanging out and Allison tells her, because she's getting stumped with this book, and Allison tells Elizabeth that, what are you looking for? She's like, well, I can't find this king's wife in anywhere in history. I'm doing all this research. I can't find it. And she said, would you be willing to let me look for her? And at the time, Elizabeth wasn't really down with this stuff. And she knew that her friend was a psychic and she was involved with these things. And she was a Reiki healer, all of these different new age practices. But she said, why not? So she literally pinpoints down this king's wife. And then eventually when she looks up the wife and then goes to historians with it, because she also confers with historians, it's the right wife. And so she's been going to this Akashic psychic who's her friend to help write her books.
Oh my gosh.
For this whole time. And she's literally written about it on her website.
Wow.
She's like, listen, I do all this research, but what I can't find, I go to her and she finds it. And then she goes back and takes that info and runs it through the filter of her historical friends. And they'll say, yeah, this actually matches up. We looked this up. We're able to find it and it matches up. So she's definitely tapping into some sort of Akashic record to help her write these books. And this is modern. This is very modern that this is happening. I was just blown away with that because it means that whatever people are tapping into when they think that they're getting into the Akashic record books, book of life, whatever you want to call it, whatever they are actually tapping into, which I believe are these nefarious entities, they know a lot. They know a whole lot. Yeah. And they've been watching us since the dawn of time. And they're able to, if you got a being that's supernatural, eternal, has seen things from the very beginning since they were created all the way to now, they can give you the info like you're so special and you're able to tap into this mysterious realm and find out these things. It happens. Whew. And I think that that's how it's happened.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I don't know if you know this, but Stephanie Meyer, the Twilight series, she says the same thing happened to her. She doesn't call it the Akashic Records, and she's a Mormon. And she said that that these were given to her like ding, like, and she just,
wow.
I know they're not historical, but it's very interesting. Yeah. Even J.K. Rowling says that. And what did she get tattooed on her after? Salve and coagula, the whole thing. Like, I'm not saying everything's nefarious, like you said, right? Like they take the things and make it nefarious. And that's just a statement, but it's interesting. Very interesting.
Super interesting. And I think it gets us to our last little person I wanted to bring up, because I don't think anybody knows about this, is the artist Prince.
Ooh.
And it's super interesting. So there's a lot of conspiracies around Prince. People have heard tons of different ones. Why he died? Was it really of the reasons they said? There's so many different things, because Prince would allude to so many esoteric things throughout his life. And he also alluded to the powers that be. And that was something that he talked about a lot. Well, towards the back end of his life, and he died in 2016, but we're talking about the early 2000s, he became a Jehovah's Witness. And he also got into Egyptian monotheism, and he really got deep into the New Age too. And he wrote an album and came out with an album in November 20th of 2001. And you're going to trip out with the name, Rainbow Children.
Oh.
So if you know anything about the Rainbow Children, the Rainbow Children are just an offshoot of the Indigo Children, which are star seeds. So these are the hybrids of aliens, what they say, extraterrestrials, and us. And we, star seeds, have this DNA in them, this bloodline in them that makes them special, that makes them able to tap into these abilities that normal people can't. So he names this entire album Rainbow Children. And this was after he became a Jehovah's Witness and he got deep into the New Age. And he wrote a song called Family Name. The intro of the song is what we're concerned with, not the actual lyrics of the song. So he does an intro where he's talking before he starts singing. And it says, "Welcome. You have just accessed the Akashic Records, Genetic Information Division. This program is required for those wishing to obtain a marriage blessing from the kingdom. When you wish to begin this program, place your right hand on the scanner and tightly clench up your butt cheeks as you might feel a slight electrical shock. Please select the race history you desire. You have selected African American. This is your history." Then he goes to sing about his African American history and all that. But he is saying he was able to write this by tapping into the Akashic Records. And this is out of Prince's own mouth and his own song.
Oh, man. Wow. That's a lot. That's a lot to unpack right there. Especially knowing that he was weirdly fearful of, he knew how he was going to die. And then he died that way. Like he'd been singing about that forever. Like if you go back in his old songs, like "Don't let the elevator take me down," blah, blah, blah. He dies in an elevator. Like it makes you wonder. And he learned to play every instrument, right? Like he was,
Yep.
I mean, like some of these people, and I'm not saying kids could ever be held accountable, right? Like when you're young, but if you're raised a certain way, you're more susceptible to things as you grow older and become like maybe then an accountability age. I don't know what age that is, but that's, that's how I feel about it.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, these child prodigy, like I'm not saying it's bad. Like I think you could use it for good, but so often it gets used for, senseless stuff. Like this lady's writing books and he's just singing songs. Like, and I'm not saying he wasn't a great artist. Like I love Prince, but also like, what did that do to change the world? Like ultimately, right?
Right.
And then, are you a tool in this thing's hand to keep people distracted? Like, do you know the story about how the Apple phone was, like, the idea for it came to be?
I've heard different aspects of it, but I'm curious what you have to say.
This is a weird little story and I have to vet it. So this is just like a rumor story that I'm going to tell you. They say that, Steve Jobs was a yogi. He was super into weird, like yogi stuff. And he was on this trip, right, to India. I think it was India. Don't quote me, guys, because it's been a while since I read this. And he said that he went to this cave where there was like a bornless one, right? Like you should recognize some of this because he had no mother and father and he was just a person that appeared. Like he was never born, kind of. And that he goes into this cave and talks to this kid. It's supposedly a kid, which, remember, people can be anything. If they know you're going to be more susceptible to be okay with a kid, they can be a kid. They know you. They say they're familiar spirits for a reason. And so he goes in there and he ends up getting really sick. He almost dies on this trip, but he said that this kid told him everything about what to do to build the phone. And then he never let his kids have one.
That is very interesting. And I haven't heard that one at all. And
this was in a yogi book he wrote. It was like a legit thing. It was like not a silly, it was a yogi book I was studying.
Wow.
So
that is interesting, but it also lends to the idea of the download and what the entity, like you said, would project itself to be that would make you feel the most comfortable.
And why wouldn't he let his kids have phones or tablets ever? Like that's telling.
Well,
yeah.
And everything surrounding his own death too is very, very interesting and why that happened. So yeah, that is wild, Heidi. I haven't heard that before. And now I'm going to go look all that up about Steve Jobs and this mysterious child that he met in a cave. And it makes me think about what even the Theosophists would talk about the caves. The cave is considered the womb. It's considered the birthing of where these entities, the gods, meet with man. So that also lends directly into his experience in the cave, And
you know who
that's wild.
Was in caves? Joseph Smith. There's a whole bunch of stuff about him being in caves doing weird rituals with his buddy, Sidney Rigdon. I'm just saying these things, it doesn't always go back to Mormonism, but it does always go back to woo-woo weird stuff. It just does.
It does.
Yeah.
And just to piggyback off what you just said about Mormonism, Aleister Crowley spent a lot of time in the Mammoth Caves when he was here in the United States, and nobody knows what he was doing there. And he only said he was there for 2 weeks. He was in the caves. Nobody knows what he was there. And then tons of weird stuff happened outside of that too. And that's going to be a part of the film that I'm putting out. So,
well, yeah. And he's a mountaineer. Nobody knows that about him. Like, why was he obsessed with that? Right. And every time he goes on these mountain trips, I'm not going to ruin it for people. Some weird stuff happens. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Big part of what he did was being a mountaineer. And there's something to be said to go within the womb or the cave, but there's also something to be said by going to the high place and meeting with entities on the high place. And I think that's where people are probably receiving these downloads or connecting what they think is the Akashic Records. And I think this is probably a good place for us to stop today. And next week, we will really drop the heat on Rudolf Steiner, and we'll definitely talk about Edgar Cayce as well some, but definitely we're going to really go hard with Rudolf Steiner because his stuff is absolutely complex and fascinating when it comes to the Akashic and what he received when he was in the Akashic. Really wild stuff.
Wild. And he is not one that you can, the reason why we had to do this, like we said before, over 6,200 lectures, not counting other things he was up to. He was doing some stuff. So it's a lot.
Well, guys, we had a blast with you today. Heidi, if you can, tell everyone where to find you, what you do before we get out of here.
You bet. And so I am Heidi Luv of The Unfiltered Rise. I am everywhere podcasts are served. I do have my own website, unfilteredrisepodcast.com. If you don't want to be on a pod chaser, and Instagram, X, all those things still at Unfiltered Rise. So if you check me out, I would appreciate it. I do cover a lot of Mormonism. If you've never seen me before, I'm an ex-Mormon, but I cover a lot of things that go into the occult, which never thought that would be my wheelhouse ever in my whole life. So, but here I am. And I appreciate Joel so much for entertaining me with the things that I know he is also set to discover and put out there. It's a weird place to be as a Christian, isn't it, Joel?
It is, but I think there's a place for it because if we can understand the enemy thoroughly, then we understand how the enemy is going to attack us. And I think that it's not everyone's calling to do that, but I'm confident that that's my calling and it seems to be yours. And it seems to be a way that we can talk about what we went through in our past to also connect it to what we're doing now in the future. And for other people who are dabbling or considering or are asking questions about things that they don't quite understand. And there's plenty of quote unquote teachers out there that are ready to give it to you and not necessarily in the right way. And some of these teachers might even be from this earth. So there's that too.
That's right.
But guys, I had a blast. Check out my new song, Imposter, on the way out. Go to my merch store at freetherabbits.myshopify.com. I got plenty of new merch up on the store. And you know what it is, guys. Go outside, touch grass, and get your tail out the hole.
I'm in a fun house, locked in a boxcar with all of these clowns. Don't feel like I belong, but maybe I do. Cause when I look in the puddle, maybe I'm just a ruse. Or maybe I'm just confused. Ooh, I'm a gorilla in the jungle, but my mind's got me trapped in the zoo. Ooh, what you see is not what I see. Cause I could be she's more friendly than pretend. And I don't know if my perception's innocent. I'm never satisfied, I'm looking to transcend. Real me gets confused with the clones I create on my own. My palace corridors to the lab, it's a throne. Pyramids of deception above the halls of a minty. If I leave, will I even miss me? Yeah. Face to face with my ambition, yeah. My position with me, I'm in competition, yeah. I could be superstitious, cause it feels like it's a sickness. What you see is not what I see.